He swept the halls while others walked past him. A single dad in silence, just trying to get through each day. But when 2 black belts challenged him in front of the entire school, what he did next left everyone speechless. Before we begin this unforgettable story of quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of courage that doesn't shout, if you're someone who believes in the power of kindness and resilience, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. Your support helps us keep these human stories alive. Now, let's begin. Version for video pacing. The mop glided silently across the polished dojo floor, its rhythmic swishes lost beneath the chatter of students, lacing up their belts and stretching under fluorescent lights. Daniel Reed kept his head down as always, a man of few words, fewer complaints, and no indulgence in being noticed. His tan janitor uniform blended into the background like smoke in fog. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday evening. Clean the locker rooms, wipe down mirrors, make sure the sparring mats weren't slick with sweat. That was his role here at Iron Belt Academy, a role he accepted without bitterness. It paid just enough to put food on the table for him and his daughter, and to let her train in the place she loved. But tonight, something shifted. "Hey, mop man," a voice called out across the room, stopping every motion midair. Daniel didn't flinch. He finished a clean sweep, wrung out the mop, and looked up calmly. The voice belonged to Logan Tate, one of the Academy's hotshot instructors, mid-30s, chiseled jawline full of swagger, and wrapped in a black belt he mentioned more often than necessary. Next to him stood Carlos Ortega, former military combatives, specialist, now a part-time coach. Another black belt, another ego. "You think you could help us out with a quick demo?" Logan asked, smiling wide. "We've got some kids here who think anyone can throw a punch. How about showing them what happens when you don't train?" A few chuckles scattered across the students. Daniel caught sight of his daughter Emily, sitting cross-legged by the edge of the mat, her cheeks flushed red. She looked at him with a mix of worry and silent pleading. "Please don't let them humiliate you, Dad." Daniel didn't answer right away. He rested the mop against the wall and slowly walked to the edge of the mat. "Come on," Carlos added. "We won't hurt you. Just a little fun for the kids." Daniel took a breath. He had spent 12 years running from this exact moment, from the man he used to be, from the title he had once worn like a second skin, Daniel Steele Silence. Read a name once chanted in arenas, now buried under layers of shame, loss, and quiet survival. He stepped onto the mat. Laughter bubbled in the room. Someone whispered, "This is gonna be brutal." Grace Whitmore stood unnoticed near the back, arms folded. Her heels clicked lightly on the hardwood as she entered just minutes earlier. She had arrived unannounced, intending to review the gym's atmosphere before extending another round of funding. But what she witnessed pulled her into a silence that went deeper than curiosity. Carlos cracked his neck. Logan bounced on the balls of his feet. "Let's give the janitor a warm welcome," Logan smirked. "Ready, mop man," Daniel raised his hand, palm forward. "One rule," he said quietly. "You stop when I say stop." That earned a louder laugh from the crowd. Carlos came first, quick as expected. A feint to the right, a jab to the left rib. But the jab never landed. Daniel pivoted. Not a hop, not a scramble. A fluid, instinctive slide that left Carlos grasping at air. In the same movement, Daniel shifted. His weight grabbed Carlos's elbow with surgical precision and redirected him across the mat. Carlos landed flat on his back, breath gone, eyes wide with disbelief. Silence. Logan blinked. Beginner's luck. Then he charged. Logan was strong, trained, and confident. He launched into a classic triple combo jab, cross roundhouse. It should have knocked a man flat. Daniel ducked. The cross passed above his head. He caught Logan's leg mid-kick, twisted slightly, and let gravity handle the rest. Logan landed harder than he ever had during drills, pain blooming in his hip. Gasps. Emily stood frozen, hands clenched to her backpack, her eyes wide, and watering had not moved off her father. Carlos was back up now, face red. Both men rushed him at once, and this time Daniel moved like water. He let them come. He stepped between strikes, redirected momentum, used their own center of gravity against them. A block here, a twist there, a shoulder bump that sent Carlos stumbling, a foot sweep that flattened Logan again. They never touched him. When it was done, Daniel stood alone in the center of the mat, barely winded. Around him, complete silence. You could hear someone breathing 3 rows back. You could hear Emily's backpack zipper tremble in her grip. Grace leaned forward slightly, lips parted, not from shock, but something deeper. Recognition. Daniel looked at Logan and Carlos, now sitting up, dazed. He offered his hand. Neither took it. "I clean this place so your students don't slip," he said evenly. "I don't expect respect, but I don't tolerate being a joke." Then he turned, walked off the mat, and picked up his mop. The sound of the mop bucket rolling across the floor was the only thing that moved for a full 10 seconds. Then quietly, applause. Scattered, hesitant, but real and growing. Emily's hands came together first. Grace was already clapping. And for the first time in over a decade, Daniel Reed didn't feel like a man hiding from his past. He felt like a man who had just rewritten it. Daniel didn't look up as the applause faded behind him. He didn't need to. He could feel it, the change in the air, the shift in how they looked at him now. The same eyes that once skimmed past him now followed him with uneasy reverence. He hated it. He pushed the mop bucket into the utility closet and shut the door gently, like sealing away something dangerous. The hallway outside the training area was quiet, lined with black and white photos of past champions, men and women with fierce eyes and clenched fists. He used to be one of them. Now he just cleaned their footprints off the floor. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn until he heard her voice. "You're not just a janitor, Grace." Whitmore said, her tone calm, but edged with something sharp. Curiosity, maybe. Daniel turned slowly. She stood there in her tailored gray blazer and sleek heels, her blonde hair pinned back. Face composed, yet undeniably engaged. She wasn't like the others. There was no mockery in her gaze, only inquiry. "I am," Daniel replied flatly, "and the floors still need to be cleaned." Grace tilted her head, as if appraising a painting whose story hadn't been told yet. "You just put 2 black belts on their backs in front of 30 witnesses. I've sat in on UFC boardrooms that had less tension than what I saw in that room." He said nothing. She crossed her arms, unfazed. "You didn't just defend yourself. You made a point. A very controlled, deliberate one. Who taught you that Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded? Life." Grace raised a brow. "Life teaches people how to survive. That was precision. That was decades of training." He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he looked past her to the exit sign glowing dimly at the end of the hallway. "I used to be someone else," he said. "Finally. Then I wasn't. It's not something I talk about." "Then let me rephrase," she said, her voice softening. "Are you going to keep pretending this gym doesn't need someone like you? That stung more than it should have." "I've seen what ego does to a place like this," Daniel replied. "It's poison. Makes boys think they're warriors just because they can throw a punch. Makes men forget that humility is part of the uniform. I've worn the other side. I know how it ends." Grace nodded slowly, absorbing more than just his words. She saw it now, the tiredness behind his eyes, the shoulders that carried more than physical weight. "I wasn't always a billionaire, Mr. Reed," she said. "I started in a boxing gym in South Chicago. I saw what happens when pride walks in wearing a belt. That caught his attention. His eyes flicked toward her for the first time with real interest. "I used to compete," she said, smiling slightly. "Then I realized I was better at building than fighting. But I never forgot what a real fighter looks like. And you tonight," she stepped forward, slightly lowering her voice, "you didn't just protect your dignity. You protected that little girl's idea of who her father is." Daniel stiffened. "Leave my daughter out of this." Grace didn't flinch. "I'm not criticizing. I'm honoring it." There was silence between them. Then the door at the far end creaked open. Emily peeked in, clutching a worn pink backpack to her chest. Daddy Daniel straightened. "Over here, Em." She tiptoed down the hall, her eyes shifting between him and Grace. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice softer now. "We're just finishing up." Grace smiled at the girl, warm and genuine. "Hi there. I'm Grace. I help sponsor this gym." Emily blinked, then whispered, "You're the lady on the brochure." Grace laughed. "Guilty." Emily looked up at her dad. "Did you really beat the teachers?" Daniel gave her a tired smile. "It wasn't a fight, Em. Just a reminder of what she asked." He crouched down, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "That strength doesn't always make noise. And that being quiet doesn't mean you're weak." Emily nodded, absorbing it like gospel. Grace watched the moment unfold, something settling in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect, yes, but also admiration and, maybe, a longing. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeply human. The sense that she had just witnessed a man rebuild his dignity without raising his voice. "Daniel," she said gently, "if you ever want to do more than mop this floor, come find me." He stood, gave her a nod, and took his daughter's hand. "I already am," he said, and walked her out the door. Grace Whitmore wasn't a woman easily shaken. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, turned crumbling athletic franchises into thriving media empires, and sat across from presidents and prime ministers without blinking. But something about Daniel Reed's quiet defiance haunted her, not in a threatening way, but in the way a melody lingers long after the music stops. That night, she didn't go home. Instead, she sat alone in her car outside Iron Belt Academy, her laptop open across the center console. A steaming cup of black coffee rested untouched in the cup holder, its aroma fading. Her manicured fingers danced across the keyboard, searching through local archives, athletic databases, fight registries. She started with the obvious Daniel Reed Martial Arts Seattle. Nothing. Then she tried Dan Reed Retired Fighter Washington State, still sparse. It wasn't until she typed Reed Plus Tournament Record Pacific Northwest, undefeated, that something strange happened. An article popped up from the Las Vegas Chronicle dated 2007. Steel Silence defends title in technical TKO Reed. Now 27-0, Daniel Steel Silence Reed remains undefeated after a brutal 5-round match that left his opponent hospitalized with a shattered jaw and 3 fractured ribs. The silent warrior, known for his calculated efficiency and refusal to engage with media, walked off the mat without celebrating. Again. Grace leaned back in her seat, stunned. She remembered Steel Silence. Everyone in the early MMA scene had. A man with surgical precision, unmatched balance, and zero theatrics. He was a ghost on the mat, a phantom with fists. But he'd vanished. There were whispers back then about a tragedy, a sparring session gone wrong, something about a teammate. Nothing concrete. And after that, nothing. Until tonight. She stared through the windshield toward the dark windows of the academy. He'd buried it so deeply that not even his posture gave it away. No sign of pride, no arrogance, just silence. But now she knew. The next morning, Daniel stood at the kitchen counter of his modest two-bedroom rental home, flipping pancakes with the kind of quiet focus he brought to everything in life. Emily sat at the table, legs swinging, sketching something in her notebook. "Daddy," she said, not looking up. Are you famous?" Daniel paused, spatula hovering in the air. "Why do you ask?" "Because people at school were talking. Mrs. Rollins said you moved like a black belt. And Mike's dad said you fought in Las Vegas. Is that true?" He sighed and turned off the stove. "Emily, there are things about my past that I haven't told you. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because I wanted us to have a quiet life. Were you a fighter?" He looked at her and nodded. She smiled. "Cool." Daniel blinked. "That's it? No more questions?" She shrugged. "I think it's cool. But I like you better as my dad." He chuckled softly. "Good. Because I like me better as your dad, too." There was a knock at the door. Emily jumped up and ran to it. Daniel followed behind, cautious as always. Grace stood on the porch in a navy blouse, dark jeans, and a confidence that made even suburban siding look like a runway backdrop. She carried a manila folder in one hand and a to-go coffee tray in the other. "Peace offering," she said, holding up the coffee. "And maybe a proposition." Daniel hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, Emily back in her room reading. Grace slid the folder across the table. "There's a program I fund. Fight Forward. We teach discipline, emotional regulation, and philosophy of martial arts to underserved youth. We've been looking for someone to lead a new pilot program at Iron Belt. The idea is to bring back the soul of martial arts, not just the sweat and muscle." Daniel opened the folder, eyeing the neatly printed mission statements, projected budgets, proposed curriculum. "Why me?" Grace leaned forward, her voice softer now. "Because in 1 minute, you taught more about restraint and honor than those instructors could in a year. Because you walk like someone who knows pain but chooses peace. And because your daughter deserves to see what legacy really looks like." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just polished elegance and corporate poise. She was a woman who remembered where she came from, who believed in building rather than branding. He set the folder down. "I'm not ready to be anyone's example," he said. She smiled. "You already are." He looked away, eyes distant. "I've hurt people before, not just in the ring, in ways that stay with you longer than broken bones." Grace tilted her head. "Then this isn't redemption. This is reinvention." A silence hung between them, rich and full. And then, as if sensing the shift, Emily wandered in, holding a drawing. "I made this for you," she said shyly to Grace. Grace took the paper gently. It was a sketch of a woman in a business suit, standing next to a man with a mop in one hand and a belt tied around the other. Grace's smile softened. "I love it." Daniel looked down at his daughter, then at Grace. "Okay," he said, his voice low but certain. "I'll try. For the kids. For Emily." And maybe, Grace added, standing up for yourself. The gym smelled like old sweat and new beginnings. Daniel stood at the edge of the mat, arms crossed, watching the class unfold before him. His janitor's shirt had been replaced by a simple gray long-sleeve tee and black athletic pants. He still felt out of place, as if every eye on him might pierce through the calm exterior and expose the truth he hadn't fully admitted to himself. He missed this. But it wasn't the fighting he missed. It was the discipline, the purpose, the quiet bond between teacher and student that didn't rely on loud voices or grand gestures. He remembered that feeling, the weight of a student's trust in your hands. It was heavier than any trophy. Across the mat, Grace leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching with quiet satisfaction. She hadn't pressured him after that morning in his kitchen. She hadn't tried to charm or coerce. She had simply invited him to step into something bigger than his past. Now here he was, not as Steele, silenced not even as Daniel Reed the janitor, just as himself. And that was more terrifying than any opponent he'd faced in the ring. "Okay, class," Logan Tate announced with a practiced grin, partner up. "We'll be working takedown defense. Nothing fancy, just good form, solid base, and smart counters." Daniel tried not to flinch. Logan had been oddly cordial since the incident. No more snide remarks. No more swagger. Just a brittle professionalism that Daniel knew all too well. It was what pride looked like when forced to bow. Coach Daniel Gray said softly as she walked up beside him. "That's what the students have started calling you." Daniel raised a brow. "I never told them they could." She smiled. "That's the funny thing about respect. Sometimes it shows up before you think you deserve it." He turned back to the mat, watching as a small boy with thick glasses struggled to keep his balance against a much taller partner. Daniel winced. "His stance is too narrow," he murmured. Grace nodded. "Want to help him?" He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Jaden," he called, his voice calm but firm. Pause. "Can I show you something?" The boy looked up nervously. "I'm sorry, I'm trying," I know, Daniel said. "That's why I'm here." He knelt beside the boy and gently adjusted his feet. "Wider base," he said. "Bend your knees. You're not a wall, you're a tree. Strong but able to bend when the wind pushes." Jaden's eyes lit up with understanding. "Try again," Daniel said, stepping back. The second time the boy held his ground. Not perfectly, but better. A small ripple of clapping came from the back of the class. Daniel turned, Grace was clapping. So was Sarah, one of the older girls. Then a few more. Then all of them. Daniel cleared his throat. "Let's keep going," he said, his tone softer. After class, the gym slowly emptied. Kids laughed. Parents chatted. Logan gave Daniel a tight nod before leaving. Carlos avoided eye contact altogether. Grace waited until the last car pulled away before walking over. "You're good with them," she said. "They're good kids," Daniel replied. She paused, then said, "So, can I ask what changed your mind about saying yes?" Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, Emily," Grace smiled. "Of course, she's proud of me again. Not because I fought someone, but because I stood up. And I realized, maybe it's not fighting I'm afraid of. Maybe it's being seen." Grace's expression softened. "Daniel," she said gently, "you're not the same man you were when you left that ring. And maybe that's a good thing." He studied her face. There was no pity in her eyes, no judgment, just honesty. "I'm still figuring out who that man is," he said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. "This might help," she said. He opened it. Inside a check. $10,000 made out to Fight Forward. Daniel Reed Program Fund. He stared at it. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know," she replied. "But the kids deserve a space that reflects what you're trying to build. This will help renovate the side room ad mats, better lighting, proper gear." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you," he murmured. "Don't," Grace said. "Just keep showing up." That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of tea and a wool blanket over his knees. The stars blinked in the silence overhead. He hadn't sat still like this in years, not without guilt. Not without ghosts. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You taught Jaden something no black belt ever did. Thank you." Sarah's mom. Daniel stared at the screen, heart full. Then slowly he smiled. Not the polite smile he wore in public. A real one. The kind a man wears when for the first time in years he starts to believe he has something left to give. The next few weeks passed like the quiet turning of a page. Each evening after his janitorial shift, Daniel stayed a little longer. He started helping with warm-ups, then demonstrating technique, then answering questions from shy students who whispered Coach Daniel like it was a spell they weren't sure would work. Before long, the dojo's side room had transformed into something entirely new. Once just a dusty storage space filled with broken pads and forgotten trophies, the room now gleamed with fresh mats, clean lines, and walls painted with words like integrity, balance, and courage. Grace had kept her word, and then some. Her design team came in discreetly, never interfering, only enhancing. She called it a dojo within a dojo, a space not just to learn to fight, but to learn why not to. Daniel taught his first official class on a Thursday. 8 kids. Some were naturally gifted. Some couldn't find their balance if you gave them a spirit level and duct tape, but all of them listened. All of them watched him. And that more than anything terrified him. He taught them not how to strike, but how to breathe, how to read tension in their opponent, how to move with purpose, not aggression. Fighting is the last answer, he told them, not the first. If you lead with your fists, your soul follows. They wrote it down. Word spread. More students came. Some parents stopped by to watch and stayed longer than they intended. So did Grace. At first, she stood in the back, but eventually she sat on the bench closest to the mat. Sometimes she took notes. Other times, she just watched with that same look she'd worn the night he dismantled 2 black belts, without raising his voice, a look that said she was witnessing something far more meaningful than combat. One evening after class had cleared out, Grace remained seated while Daniel wiped down the mats. You know, she said, watching you teach is like watching someone play a piano. They once swore they'd never touch again. Daniel looked up, mildly amused. You're poetic today, she shrugged. It's that kind of room. He set down the spray bottle and sat on the bench next to her, stretching out his legs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The gym beyond the side room was still alive with muted noise, heavy bags thudding, students calling out stances. But in here, it felt like a sanctuary. Grace turned toward him slightly. Do you ever miss it? The spotlight, he asked. No. The rhythm, the clarity. That place inside yourself you go when everything else falls away. Daniel took a breath. Sometimes. But I also remember what it cost me. She studied him quietly. Tell me. He hesitated. Then, as if the mats beneath him had whispered permission, he said, There was a kid, Tony. We trained together, lived together, came up through the same school. He was faster. I was more technical. We pushed each other. Grace listened without a word. One night, Daniel continued, we were sparring, just like any other. But the pressure outside the ring was different that week. Sponsors, media, family drama. He threw a combo too fast. I countered harder than I should have. He paused. His head hit the mat wrong. He never woke up. Grace's eyes softened, but she didn't offer a platitude. She simply let the silence speak for her. The doctors called it an accident, Daniel said. But I knew better. I'd lost control. I let rage in, just for a second. He looked at her. That's why I walked away. Not because I couldn't fight, but because I couldn't trust myself not to. Grace reached out and touched his hand just for a moment. You're not that man anymore, she said. I hope not. They sat in silence again. Then came a knock on the frame of the open door. It was Logan Tate, still in uniform, sweat lining his brow. Daniel, he said, voice clipped but not disrespectful. Can I talk to you? Daniel stood surprised. Grace gave him a nod and stepped out quietly. Logan entered, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable. I saw what you're doing with the kids, he began. And I don't like how that first night went down. But you're good. And they listen to you. They respect you. Daniel waited. Logan cleared his throat. Thing is, Carlos doesn't like it. Says you're overstepping. Says it's making him look bad in front of the owner. Daniel's jaw tightened. This isn't about ego. Logan gave a rueful smile. It's always about ego in places like this. I'm just here to teach. Yeah, I believe that. But Carlos, he's planning something. He wants to push you out. Says janitors don't belong on the mat. Daniel's silence was answer enough. I thought you should know, Logan said. I've seen what happens when guys like him feel threatened. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, he added that night. You didn't humiliate us. You taught us. Took me a while to see it. But I do now. He left. Daniel stood there, the shadows of old battles creeping in at the edges of his piece. Later that night, Daniel sat in the dim kitchen reading Emily's spelling homework when his phone lit up. A text from an unknown number. You think you can just take over my gym? Let's see how long that legacy lasts. See. Daniel stared at it, then deleted it. He wouldn't reply, not with words, and definitely not with fists. But if Carlos wanted to test what kind of man Daniel Reed had become, he'd find out soon enough. It started with a missing key. Daniel showed up Friday evening to unlock the side room for his youth class, only to find that his keycard no longer worked. He tried twice, then a third time, listening to the faint buzz of rejection echo against the steel door. The hallway was empty. Cold. He sighed and made his way to the front office. Carlos was already there behind the desk, sipping from a protein shake like a man who had just made a point. Daniel didn't ask. He simply held up his keycard, stopped working. Carlos didn't even look up. System refresh. Maybe your clearance wasn't renewed. Daniel stared at him. That room's scheduled for class right now. Then I guess they'll have to stretch in the main hall. Daniel clenched his jaw, but his voice stayed level. There are 7 kids waiting for a class they've earned. You know that program is funded. You signed off on it last month. Carlos shrugged. Yeah, well, the board's been reviewing use of space and liability. You're not an active employee. Technically, you're just cleaning staff with a temporary instructional volunteer role, without formal instructor credentials. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if trying to hold in something older than anger. I'm not here to replace anyone, he said. I'm here for the kids. That's cute, Carlos replied. But this isn't a charity, and it's not a therapy circle. Daniel took a breath. What's this really about? Carlos finally met his gaze. It's about hierarchy, about respect. You had your time. Now stay in your lane. Daniel nodded once, then walked away. Grace found him an hour later sitting alone on the back steps of the gym, legs outstretched, arms resting on his knees. The night had turned colder than expected. His sleeves were rolled up, but his silence was taut, like a taut wire just before it snaps. I heard, she said gently. He didn't answer at first. I got the call from one of the parents, she added. They were furious. Their kids came home in tears. Said their class was canceled without notice. Daniel looked down at his hands. They were proud of themselves, he said. Not for beating anyone, just for learning to control their breath, for understanding balance. Now it's all noise again. Back to whoever yells the loudest. Grace sat beside him, careful not to speak too soon. Carlos won't win, she said. Daniel gave a short, bitter laugh. Carlos already won. He used rules, policies, fine print. Then we changed the fine print. He looked at her. It's not that simple. It is, she said firmly. This gym runs because of my funding, and I don't support ego-driven instructors with something to prove. I support people who teach respect by example. He shook his head. If you go over his head, it'll only make things worse. You'll put a target on the program. On me. I'm not afraid of pushback, she said. I am. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something underneath the stoicism, a kind of weariness. Yes, but also a man trying to protect something delicate. Not his pride, not even his role, his peace. I can't go back to the man I was, Grace, he said quietly. I clawed my way out of that cage. I can't fight this with fists. You don't have to, she said. You fight it with truth. He studied her, and maybe it was the moonlight softening the lines in her face, or the stillness between them, but something unspoken shifted. She wasn't just his sponsor or a businesswoman who saw value in his philosophy. She was someone who saw him not just the shadow of the fighter, but the man who rose from it. Tomorrow, she said, there's a community class. You'll lead it. I'll be there. So will the parents. Let's show them who this place really belongs to. He hesitated. And if Carlos shuts it down, Grace smiled, but her eyes held steel. Then I'll call the press. The next morning, Daniel arrived early. He wore black pants and a Navy instructor's G-nothing flashy, but clean, simple, and quietly commanding. Emily helped him set up pads in the side room. They worked silently in sync, father and daughter, moving like a team that had known each other longer than time. Students began to trickle in, then parents, then Grace. She wore flats, black jeans, and a simple white blouse. Her hair was tied back, and for the first time, she wasn't just observing, she was part of the room. She helped hand out water bottles, adjusted the chairs, and greeted each parent by name. The tension in the air began to ease, until Carlos walked in. His arms were crossed, face unreadable. Behind him stood Logan, who looked unsure. Daniel stepped forward. This is a community class. Open. Voluntary. You're welcome to stay or join. Carlos smirked. Funny how you interpret voluntary when you're using gym property and resources. Grace's voice cut in. It's fully funded, pre-approved, and listed in the revised schedule posted last night. Carlos turned to her, incredulous. You changed the schedule. No, she said, cool as glass. I funded a new one. Carlos's jaw clenched. Grace stepped beside Daniel. You can challenge this later. For now, I suggest you let the class begin. Or else explain to these parents why you're shutting down a free program their kids rely on for confidence and self-respect. A quiet murmur of support rippled through the room. Carlos stepped back. Didn't leave, but he didn't interrupt again. Daniel looked out at the group, 20 people young and old, nervous and eager. And he began. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't make declarations. He simply moved, taught, encouraged, adjusted stances, helped a child find their balance, showed an older man how to fall safely without fear. And as he did, the energy changed. The room filled not with ego but with presence, respect, focus. Carlos stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching something he couldn't quite name. Something he had never been able to control, a legacy built not on dominance, but on dignity. Grace stood near the door, arms crossed, her eyes soft. And Daniel, quiet, steady, Daniel taught not just with words, but with a life rebuilt one posture at a time. The house was quiet after Emily went to sleep, her soft breathing muffled by her half-closed bedroom door. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the windows, like the world itself had learned restraint. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in his hand, though he hadn't taken a sip. Across from him, Grace watched him with the patient stillness of someone who knew not to rush a story. He hadn't meant to invite her in. She'd offered him a ride after the class, and somehow the conversation had carried them here. One cup of tea. Just one. That was the plan. But silence had its own gravity, and tonight it was pulling something loose in him. Daniel stared down at the faded placemat under his cup. You ever bury something so deep you forgot it was still breathing? Grace didn't answer with words. She simply tilted her head, her expression open, waiting. My father, Daniel said slowly, was a pastor. Kind, but rigid. He believed in order, in earning your place. Discipline was love in his language. Grace leaned forward slightly. Was he proud of you? Daniel gave a bitter smile. He was until I started winning. She frowned, confused. He nodded. When the wins started piling up, so did the sponsors, the fights, the lights. He said it was prideful. Said I'd traded purpose for applause. I told him he didn't understand. He said I didn't listen. And did? You, Grace asked. Daniel took a long breath. Not until it was too late. He rubbed his palms together as if trying to smooth out the memory. I was in Japan. Main event. Tony, my best friend. My corner called the fight early. Said I wasn't reading the opponent right. But I was so far into the roar of it, the blood, the pressure, that I ignored him. He paused. His eyes grew distant. Next week we sparred. Just routine. He was off that day. I was sharper than usual. One throw, one careless, overpowered throw. I pushed too hard. He hit his neck on the wrong angle. Gone before the ambulance even got there. Grace closed her eyes, not in judgment, but in reverence. I flew home, Daniel whispered, and my father wouldn't even look at me. He said, I raised you to be strong in silence, not savage in spotlight. And then she asked softly. Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I stopped speaking altogether for a while, stopped fighting, stopped being anyone at all. The rain tapped louder for a moment as if reacting. Grace looked at him, not with pity, but recognition. I think we all break in two at some point, she said. Some of us just learn how to walk on both halves. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. There was something about her calm that didn't feel like pretense. She wasn't performing empathy. She was carrying her own quiet scars. What about you? He asked. She smiled faintly. My mother died when I was 11. My dad ran a failing gym and drowned in debt. I spent my teenage years handing out flyers and cleaning sweat off dumbbells to keep the doors open. That gym was my school, my church, and my battlefield. Daniel's brow furrowed. Is that what made you who you are? No, she said. What made me who I am was watching people with nothing still choose to give, still show up, still teach. I saw more nobility in the old trainers who fixed broken tape with borrowed glue than in half the CEOs I've met. He nodded slowly. Grace set her tea down. That's why I believe in you. Not because of what you used to be, but because of what you've become when no one was looking. Daniel sat back. That truth settled into him like warm water soaking into cold skin. Emily asked me the other night if I was ever famous, he said. I told her I was, but I didn't like who I was back then. Grace smiled. And what did she say? She said, I like you better as my dad. Grace's eyes shimmered. She looked away for a second, just long enough to collect herself. Then, with a quiet resolve, she stood and walked to the bookshelf in the corner. There, tucked behind a stack of old cookbooks, she pulled out something unexpected, a framed photograph. It showed Daniel in his prime arms, raised gloves, bloodied sweat pouring from his brow. A title belt strapped across his waist. The crowd behind him blurred in motion, but his eyes, even in triumph, were tired. You kept that? Grace asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't hang it, he replied. She looked down at the photo again. You should. Daniel stood, walked over, and took the frame gently from her hands. Then, to her surprise, he opened the back and slid the photo out. He held it in his hands for a moment, studying it. Then he folded it in half and placed it in the trash. Grace blinked. That was the only copy. I don't need a reminder of who I was, he said, turning to her. I'd rather focus on who I'm becoming. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Not the clock. Not the air. Not even the rain. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a touch. But it was the kind of moment that rewrites the emotional temperature between two people forever. Grace nodded, understanding what wasn't said. I should go, she whispered. Daniel stepped aside to let her pass, but his voice stopped her just before she reached the door. Thank you, he said. For what? For not looking away. She smiled gently. Thank you for finally letting me look. Then she slipped into the night, the rain swallowing her footsteps, and Daniel stood in the quiet, no longer burdened by the weight of the silence he once thought would protect him. He didn't feel healed, but he no longer felt hollow, and that for the first time in 20 years was enough. The cafeteria smelled like peanut butter, old linoleum, and nerves. Emily sat at the edge of the third-grade lunch table legs, swinging beneath her denim skirt, fingers picking at the crust of her sandwich. She wasn't hungry. Not really. Not when the whispering had started again. That's her someone said behind cupped hands. Her dad beat up Sensei Logan. My mom says he just mops floors. Why does a janitor teach karate anyway? Emily kept her eyes on her tray, willing herself not to cry. She thought it was over. After the demonstration, after the applause, after Grace had taken that picture of her dad smiling on the mat with his students. She'd printed it and taped it inside her backpack. That was her dad. Strong. Calm. Good. But not everyone saw him that way. A lunch aide passed by and smiled at her. Doing okay, sweetheart. Emily nodded automatically. She wasn't okay, but she had decided something. That evening, Daniel was fixing a loose hinge on the hallway closet when Emily padded up quietly behind him. He noticed the silence first. Her absence of words, of humming, of bouncing on her toes like she usually did. He turned. Hey, Em. What's up? She held something out to him, a folded piece of paper, edges soft with handling. What's this? She shrugged. You'll see. Daniel unfolded it carefully. Inside was a short essay written in her best cursive. At the top, What Makes Someone a Hero? By Emily Reed. He read the first lines aloud softly. A hero is someone who protects others, even when they're scared. A hero is someone who doesn't need to be loud to be strong. My hero is my dad. He used to fight in big matches, but now he teaches people how to breathe. Daniel's throat tightened. Some kids say he's just a janitor, but I say he cleans so nobody slips. And when people laugh at him, he doesn't get mad. He just shows them how to stand tall without pushing anyone down. By the time he reached the final sentence, his hands were trembling. I love my dad because he teaches me that being strong doesn't mean winning. It means being kind, even when nobody's looking. He looked up at her eyes, glassy. Emily. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. There's a school assembly tomorrow. They said we could volunteer to read something about community heroes. I want to read that. Daniel's heart caught in his chest. Sweetheart, you don't have to do that. I don't want you feeling like you have to defend me. I'm not defending you, she said, suddenly fierce. I'm honoring you. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. And then slowly, he knelt to her level, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You're the bravest person I know, he whispered. She grinned. I get it from you. The next morning, Daniel walked Emily into school. Not just to drop her off, but to sit in the back row of the multi-purpose room, his calloused hands resting nervously on his knees. Grace had insisted on coming too. I'm not letting the most important speech of the year go undocumented, she said, slipping into the folding chair beside him with her phone already recording. One by one, students took the mic. A firefighter's son, a girl who spoke about her mom's nursing shifts, a boy whose brother helped at the food pantry. Then came Emily. She walked to the front paper in both hands, knees wobbling slightly. But when she looked out across the rows of faces, some kind, some curious, some already smirking, she paused. And then she saw her dad. Saw how his eyes watched her like nothing else existed. Her back straightened. She took a deep breath and read. The room was quiet when she finished, not silent with discomfort, but hushed in that reverent, something just shifted kind of way. Then the applause started. Soft at first, then louder. From teachers, from parents, and most of all from the man who sat in the back row, eyes full of tears he didn't wipe away because he wasn't hiding anymore. After the assembly, parents approached Daniel with cautious respect. "You're Emily's father. She's an amazing kid. She speaks like someone who's been taught the right way." He smiled and thanked them, but mostly he listened, because sometimes that was the best way to be heard. Grace stood beside him, beaming. "You know what just happened," she said, her voice low. "What?" She flipped the whole narrative. In 2 minutes, he nodded. "She's always been better at it than me." Grace turned to him, more serious now. "Daniel, you don't have to fight to earn respect anymore. You've already lived it. And now the people around you are starting to see it." He looked at her, not just as the woman who funded the dojo, but as someone who had seen him at his lowest and never once flinched. Sometimes, he said quietly, we wait for the world to notice. And sometimes, it takes a little girl with pigtails and the heart of a lion. Grace smiled, the kind that started in the eyes and didn't stop. "She didn't just speak for you," she said. "She reminded all of us what legacy really means." Daniel looked down at Emily, who had run ahead to show her teacher something. "She's the best thing I've ever made," he said. Grace didn't respond with words. She just slipped her hand into his as they walked out together, the hallway echoing with the sound of shoes and a future slowly, gently unfolding. They didn't see it coming. The video hit social media like a slow-moving tidal wave, quiet at first, barely noticed. A shaky clip from a student's parent, Daniel, correcting a student's foot placement during a class, Grace seated in the background, smiling. The caption was harmless enough. The janitor who teaches better than the instructors. But it didn't stay harmless. By morning, the comments had multiplied. "Why is an unlicensed janitor instructing kids? No background check. Nepotism at its finest. Grace Whitmore sponsoring her secret boyfriend Daniel," read the headlines on his phone in stunned silence as he stood outside the dojo, the early sunlight slicing across the parking lot. He didn't care about the gossip. He'd lived through worse. But this wasn't just about him. It was about Grace and Emily and every child who now had to navigate a story that was no longer theirs. Inside the dojo, students stretched quietly. The parents were whispering again, just like at the school, except now the whispers were sharper, more pointed. Grace arrived late that morning. Her usual calm was replaced with a tight-lipped focus, her phone in hand, messages flashing non-stop. Daniel walked over, voice low. "We need to talk." She nodded and followed him to the back office, closing the door softly behind her. "I didn't want this," he said. "Neither did I," she replied, dropping her bag onto the desk. "But it's out now. They're saying we stopped, then forced it out. That we're involved." Grace met his eyes. "Would that be so terrible?" He blinked. "What?" she sighed. "Daniel, I'm not embarrassed by you. I'm not hiding. If anything, this outrage says more about them than us." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "It's not about us. It's about the kids. This program. You. Your reputation." She stepped closer. "Do you think I built all this just to protect an image you've got investors, board members, your name on foundation walls? And you think I'm afraid of some tabloid scandal?" Her tone sharpened. "Daniel, I grew up watching my dad clean toilets in his own gym just to keep the lights on. I've been called too soft by CEOs and too hard by donors. I didn't survive all that to let internet cowards define who I stand beside. His voice softened. Even if it costs you. She didn't flinch, especially then. There was a knock. Carlos. He didn't wait for permission. He walked in like he owned the oxygen in the room. "Thought I'd find you both here," he said with a thin smile. "Big morning. The board's already seen the posts. Parents are calling. They want answers." Grace's voice dropped into steel. "They'll get them." Carlos turned to Daniel. "You've brought heat we don't need. Your little program suspended until further review. Effective immediately." Daniel's jaw tensed. "You're punishing the kids for gossip. I'm protecting this institution," Carlos snapped. "From liability, from blurred lines, from the illusion of legitimacy." Grace stepped forward. "You don't have that authority." "Actually," Carlos said, pulling out a folded document from his jacket pocket, "I do." He handed it over, an emergency resolution passed by the board's executive subcommittee. Temporary removal of non-credentialed volunteer instructors, pending investigation. Grace scanned it. "You called an emergency vote without me." "You were distracted?" Carlos said smugly. "Conflicted?" Daniel said nothing, just stared at the paper, then quietly asked, "What do you want from me?" Carlos shrugged. "Resign, disappear, clean the floors if you want. But stop pretending you belong on the mat." Silence stretched between them. Then Grace tore the document in half. Carlos stiffened. "That's an official." "No," she cut in. "It's a piece of paper. My foundation owns 62% of the operating budget for this dojo. You may want to rethink who's actually in charge." Carlos sneered. "So you're doubling down?" "Fine. Let's take it public." He left, slamming the door behind him. Grace exhaled. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He stepped closer. "Why?" She looked up at him, something trembling behind her resolve. "Because I believe in what you're doing. Because you changed the culture of this place. Because Emily believes in you, and so do I." He held her gaze. "And what if it all falls apart?" "Then we rebuild," she whispered. "Together." The word hung in the air like a promise. Neither of them had said aloud before. Together. That night, Daniel walked Emily home from the library. She chattered about a new book and how she wanted to draw her own comic about a girl with a mop who defeated evil just by standing still. As they reached the porch, she tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, yeah, kiddo, some kid said you're in trouble." He crouched down. "Do you believe that?" She shook her head. "I told them you clean floors and hearts." He smiled. "That's a tall order." She grinned. "You do both." Daniel held her close, tight, steady, and as the sun dipped behind the trees casting gold across the world, he realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was being seen. And for the first time in 2 decades, he was letting it happen. The building on Ashmore Street had been vacant for years. Once a corner hardware store, it stood half forgotten, beneath ivy-choked eaves and peeling red paint. Daniel had walked past it for years, without a second glance, until Grace stopped her car in front of it one morning and handed him the keys. "What's this?" he asked, brows drawing together. "A gift," she replied. Or rather, a seed. Daniel stared at the building. "You bought it, I did." "For what?" "For you," she said. "For the kids. For everything we said. We wanted to build away from board votes and bruised egos." He didn't know what to say. Grace continued, voice softer now. "We'll call it Hope Floor, because that's what you taught them to stand on." Over the next 6 weeks, something extraordinary happened. Volunteers showed up, parents, students. neighbors, even a few skeptical board members, who quietly peeled off their loyalties and picked up paintbrushes. Emily helped pick the wall colors, soft blues and warm grays. A local carpenter donated reclaimed wood for benches. An artist friend of Grace's painted a mural on the back wall, a tree growing from the center of a practice mat, its branches wrapped in words like, "Respect, stillness, truth." Daniel spent every spare moment there, installing mats, adjusting light fixtures, building handrails. But more than that, he spent time sitting in the middle of the space watching it evolve. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence filled the place, so did his silence. The opening day of Hope Floor came with little fanfare. No ribbon cutting, no media circus. Just a flyer, a shared post, and an open door. By 9:00 a.m., the room was full. Kids with wide eyes, parents with hopeful expressions, a few curious skeptics lingering near the coffee table. And standing quietly near the corner, Logan Tate, arms folded, expression unreadable. Daniel welcomed them with a bow. "Today," he said, "we start by unlearning." He paused. "Not just bad habits in movement, but bad habits in judgment, in pride, in how we see ourselves and each other." He looked across the room at young and old black and white athletes and first-timers. No one here is above anyone else. The mat doesn't care about titles. It only reveals the truth of how we carry ourselves. So let's carry something worth leaving behind. And with that, he stepped back and began. 2 hours later, as the first class ended and the room buzzed with quiet excitement, Carlos Mitchell walked in. Uninvited, unapologetic. He was dressed casually, no belt, no GI, just jeans and a polo. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes scanned the space with the kind of scrutiny a man used when assessing what he no longer controlled. Grace approached him first. "Carlos," she said smoothly. "I didn't expect to see you here," I heard he said, nodding toward the mural. "Hard to miss when half the city's talking about it." She smiled tightly. "And what are they saying? That you and your janitor built something out of pity?" Grace's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you see?" Carlos looked past her to where Daniel was kneeling beside a student, gently correcting their foot position, to the faces of parents, watching with pride, not skepticism. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to Daniel. The room quieted. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't step back. He didn't step forward. Carlos nodded once. "You built something real." Daniel didn't respond. Carlos hesitated. "I came to see if I still belonged." Daniel studied him, the weight of their shared history present, but not hostile. "This place is for anyone who chooses to walk in humility," he said. Carlos swallowed. Even if they've spent too long walking in pride, Daniel's expression softened just slightly, especially then. Carlos lowered his head and bowed. A gasp rippled through the room, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. A man once defined by ego had just stepped into the quiet power of humility, not out of defeat, but out of recognition. Daniel returned the bow, and for the first time the air between them held not resentment, but redemption. Later that evening, after the last student had left and the lights were dimmed, Grace and Daniel stood in the center of the mat. The mural loomed large behind them, its painted tree reaching upward, like arms in prayer. "This place," she said, "feels like something more than a gym." Daniel nodded. "It's not about what we teach, it's about what we heal." She looked at him, then really looked. "You've changed, Daniel," he met her gaze. "So have you." There was a long pause between them. Not awkward, just full. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," Grace whispered. "And now I know. Real strength is how you love what's broken and still believe in what it can become." Daniel stepped closer, barely a breath between them. "You believed in me when I didn't," he said. "You gave me a reason to," she replied. And in that moment, the story they'd been writing in silence turned a page neither of them had dared imagine. Not because they needed saving, but because they had become safe to each other. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, Hope Floor stood steady like the people who built it, not from titles or trophies, but from trials, truth, and quiet courage. The kind that lasts, the kind that becomes legacy. The sound of bare feet on the mat was soft but sure. Daniel moved in slow, practiced arcs, guiding Emily through a simple kata, a sequence of motion and stillness, breath and balance. She mirrored him with growing confidence, the smile on her face more radiant than any belt could offer. They were alone in Hope Floor. The light from the skylight poured over them like blessing. When the form ended, Emily bowed and laughed. "I think I'm almost ready for Orange Belt." Daniel smiled. "Not almost. You're already there. You just haven't seen it yet." Emily threw her arms around him, squeezing hard. "Love you, Dad." He paused. He never took those words for granted. He lived inside them. "I love you too, Em. Always." The next week brought something unexpected. A letter. Not digital, not typed. Handwritten. Folded once and slipped under the door. Daniel opened it in the stillness of morning. "Dear Mr. Walker, my name is Lydia Patterson. I was the mother of James Patterson, a student you taught many years ago. He spoke about you often, about how you were the first adult who ever listened to him without judgment. He never forgot what you taught him. James passed away last year in a construction accident. He left behind a notebook full of reflections. On the last page he wrote, 'If I ever become the man I want to be, it's because Mr. Walker first saw that man in me. I thought you should know. Thank you. You left more behind than you ever realized.'" Daniel folded the letter with trembling hands. He sat down on the bench beside the mural, looking up at the tree painted on the wall. Some leaves fall, but others become the root of everything that grows after. That evening, Grace arrived just before closing. She was wearing jeans and a soft burgundy sweater. No heels, no press conferences, no titles. Just her. She found Daniel on the back patio, watching the stars poke through the dusk. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting beside him. "Dangerous?" he teased. She smiled. "I think you should teach full-time. No janitor duties. Full salary, curriculum design, your own schedule." He looked at her. "And if I say no, then I'll keep asking." A pause. "I thought I lost everything once," he said slowly. "Back when I walked away from the circuit, when I thought silence meant failure. But now, it feels like silence gave me something louder." She tilted her head. "Like what?" "Like peace." She reached over and took his hand, calloused, steady, real. "Do you know what peace is to me?" she asked. He shook his head. "You. Emily. This place. The sound of you breathing beside me when you fall asleep reading old philosophy books." He chuckled. "I only did that twice. 3 times," she corrected. He turned toward her. "Grace." She leaned in. No more maybes. And then, under a sky full of quiet stars, Daniel kissed the woman who had once seen him as nothing more than a background figure, and now saw him as everything. The next month, the school board formally reinstated Daniel as an honorary instructor. But by then, it didn't matter. The community had already chosen who they believed in. One afternoon, as Daniel wiped down the mirror after a class, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Hey, Sensei." It was Logan. Daniel turned. Logan wore a white belt. "I figured," Logan said with a crooked grin. "If I'm going to fight you again someday, I should start from scratch." Daniel tossed him a GI, then bow in. Logan did. And with that, the last ghost of judgment dissolved into laughter and second chances. On the one-year anniversary of Hope Floor, Grace hosted a quiet celebration. Families brought food. Kids performed skits. A slideshow played in the corner, showing photos from classes' service projects, and even the time Daniel had slipped on a yoga ball and blamed gravity's bias. As the evening wound down, Daniel stood before the crowd. "I used to think legacy was what you left behind when you were gone," he said. "But I was wrong." He glanced toward Emily sitting beside Grace, giggling as she licked icing off her fingers. "Legacy is what you choose to leave behind while you're still here. It's how you love, how you lift others, how you stay." He paused. "And if that legacy starts with cleaning floors, then I'm honored." The room stood and applauded, not just out of respect, but out of recognition. He hadn't just shocked the school, he'd changed it. Forever. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we'd love to know. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? It's always beautiful to see how these moments connect us, across distance and time. And if you'd like more heartfelt stories like this, feel free to subscribe to Soul Moments Story. There's no pressure, just an open invitation to walk this path of quiet courage, love, and second chances with us. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending your time with us. It means more than words can say. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing.